Thank you for joining us for Working Through the Word, a ministry of the Richmond Church of Christ. Let's join our pulpit minister, Mike Johnson, as he brings today's lesson.
To think about laying up treasures in heaven, we must remember one thing and think about another thing. Let's remember first the idea of the treasure from this morning. We will get to that. But secondly, I want to think about, I don't think we can answer the question, how to lay up treasures in heaven. There's no doubt we're supposed to do that. But we can't do that without considering a couple of things. One of those is, and I was thinking about this just a minute ago, it is not possible for us to add any treasures to heaven. You ever thought about that? I mean, how can we make heaven better? So when we're laying up treasures, it can't mean that we're doing something to improve heaven. And it can't mean that we're doing something that God isn't doing. He's made it. He designed it. So there's something else going on. Number two, I think we have to be thinking about the concept of what we often discuss, and that is the concept of, are there degrees of punishment and reward? Meaning, are there greater or lesser treasures? Well, let's think about that for a minute. The idea of degrees of reward and punishment has been discussed many times. I'm not even sure that any of us can have the right answer fully. Often we get into questions like that and we have to deal with Isaiah 55, where God said, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. And we are comfortable with that. We just have to say, okay, I don't get it. It's above my pay grade, as it were, and we just move on without denying what it is. I may not fully understand it, but I can't deny it. And so when we think about the concept that is here, we also need to remember that Jesus said in Matthew 25 and 46 that in describing the fate of the ones on the left, the goats and the sheep on the right, these will go away into everlasting destruction, but the righteous into eternal life. Both groups are going to have an eternal consequence. We have to accept that. And so whatever we understand about the concept of degrees, there's both either punishment or they are reward. Tom Holland was my professor at Freed-Hardeman, and in one of my classes he made the statement that has helped me at least with the mentality and the attitude toward that concept, when he said, I would much rather have a mat on the floor of heaven than have a throne in hell. So whatever the degrees turn out to be, I think he's right. Just get to heaven and it'll work itself out. But it is a fact that there's something about this degrees of reward and punishment that seem to have a place. There are thoughts that imply that there is something maybe better for some. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul is writing, and he's talking about, he said, verse 9, you are God's fellow workers, you're his field, you're his building. And he said he's the builder, the wise master builder. And he says, now, let's be careful how you build on it. No other foundation can anyone lay than what is laid, and that is Jesus Christ. And then he says, if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, or precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will be declared. Now, here's the point. He talks about different things by which to build on that foundation. He talked about 3 that will survive a fire. And he talked about 3 that would not survive a fire. And then he goes on to say, and remember, he's talking now not to people who are not his children. He's talking about his children, building on the foundation of Jesus. So this is only addressed to Christians who have built their lives on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And it says each one will be tested of what sort it is. If anyone's work which he has built endures, he will receive reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. Here's what Paul is saying. When we are building on the foundation of Christ, part of that is working with other people. And there are some people that will become Christians that will be accounted to the fact that you were doing your job. And they will be gold and silver and precious stones, and they're going to last. But there are some who won't make it, and they will fall away. But their falling away doesn't impact you, except that, it seems, there is reward seems to be greater if they do survive into heaven versus those who don't last and are not faithful. And so there's the idea that the reward seems to be felt differently by some who are rewarded than by others who are rewarded based upon the work that they did here. So that's an idea. It's much easier to see that the Bible talks about degrees of punishment. Remember when Jesus said, if you had seen the things, or if Tyre and Sidon had seen the things that you've been given, if these cities had seen the miracles that I've done, wouldn't they have survived? Wouldn't those cities have survived because they would have seen the signs and listened? How much greater will be your punishment than theirs because you see but you don't accept it? They didn't get to see the things that I have done. And so a number of passages talk about a greater punishment than some. And if you have an outline, you have all of those verses. I don't want to spend a lot of time in this section. But what I want to do is offer two possibilities to understand degrees in the future, whether they are degrees or intensities of reward and punishment, but particularly of reward. It seems to me possible that instead of there being levels of heaven, if you will, some of us will be in the basement, some will be on the first floor and second floor and right on up. Instead of that, it seems to me possible that combining what we're talking about tonight, laying up treasures in heaven, with that idea may produce this concept. It may be possible that heaven will be a place that will be experienced differently by each person who is there. And what I mean by that is this. Because of the work done here, because Scripture is full of the idea that works from here follow us to there. The more spiritually minded we become here, the more we are prepared to experience the fullness of heaven over there. So that really what's happening is not that God is going to assign people to different levels and you're not allowed to transfer back and forth. You have to stay on your level. You can't go visit those who have a greater reward or those who didn't get as much. But rather, we're all together, but it's going to feel like it's our own personal heaven. I'm experiencing it with this kind of depth, this kind of understanding, because of my spiritual work here, and you will have the same experience. It's an interesting concept, I think. But then someone brought up Luke chapter 12. And you might go there for a moment and notice what is happening in Luke 12. In this text, starting in verse number 35, Jesus talked about a master who has servants. He returns from a wedding, and they're going to open up. And blessed are those servants, verse 37, whom the master, when he comes, will find watching. Assuredly, I say to you, he will gird himself, sit down and eat, and they will come and serve him. And it doesn't matter what watch of the night he comes. And then verse 40, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming, and is an hour when you do not expect. Now notice what Peter said. Do you speak this parable to us or to all people? Jesus didn't answer the question. He just simply said, well, who is the wise steward that will be placed over the household? Blessed is the servant whom the Lord, the master, finds doing what he's supposed to be doing. But if the servant who's supposed to be doing says, well, my master's taking his time, he's delayed, he's not coming back, he's not doing what he ought to be doing, and he begins to beat the male and the female servants to eat and drink and be drunk, the master will come on a day when he's not looking for him, and an hour when he's not aware, and will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant who knew his master's will and did not prepare himself or do according to his will shall be beaten with many stripes. But he who did not know and committed these things is deserving of stripes, will be beaten with few. Now here's the question. To whom is he talking? If he's talking about a master and servants, is he talking about God and the servants of him? And therefore is in fact this text actually saying that the way or the standard of judgment for those who are faithful will be based upon how faithful you were? In other words, if you knew and didn't do what you should have done, judgment's going to be harsher on you. But if you didn't know, then it won't be as harsh. If you believe that the servants here are children of God, Christians, he's not talking to non-Christians. Then he's only talking about a standard by which the reward will be judged, harshly or not as harshly. I said all that to say this. I don't have a clue. I really don't. I want to believe the concept that the degrees of reward is basically understood as how am I going to perceive heaven when I get there, based upon my spiritual work here. I'm more prepared, and therefore I will experience it more. That's the way I want to believe, and so that's what I'm going to do. You take it as you will. Now we come to the question that we're going to lay up treasures. The idea of laying up treasures is not an idea of saying, I'm going to have a higher place in heaven. The more I can accumulate over there in the mansion that God's prepared, the more I have a greater reward waiting for me. No, laying up treasures there is about preparing here to experience there. Now, I think that is important because in this text, we're trying to figure out when Jesus said to lay them up, what am I going to do? Well, if I understand that my experience of heaven is going to be based on my work of spiritual commitment here, it's probably going to change how I do things, maybe. In the Revelation, John wrote in chapter 14, verse 13, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord from here on, for their works do follow them. Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that the works that we do here, the spiritual involvement, the spiritual growth and maturity that we have here affects what's going to be over there. So what is our treasure? Well, this morning I said, I think the treasure that we have is that God gave a piece of us to Himself to take care of and to manage, to be with Him when He calls Him back. The Spirit will return to God that gave it. And so my treasure, and I'm going to lay up treasures for myself in heaven, here is what seems to be said. I am, remember I said this morning, treasure is a noun, it's also a verb. You have the treasure, but then you treasure the treasure. And if my treasure is God living in me, then treasuring it and preparing that part of me for an experience there is my work with God here, getting ready for there. And then I think of Luke 21 and verse 19, and you get this idea. Jesus said, possess your souls through patience. If you already have it, how do you possess it? If God gave us a soul, He gave us a piece of Himself, what does Jesus mean when He says to possess it? Well, I think it means to appreciate it, to understand it, to acknowledge it, to make it your own. Sure, God gave it, but He wants us to make it our own. And so how do we lay up treasures in heaven? We do what we can to make the soul better or deeper or more committed. And in doing that, I'm treasuring for the future. So I found these things. I found these ideas connected to the soul. Do not fear the one who can destroy the body in hell, or destroy the body, but fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. If I'm going to lay up treasure in heaven, one of the things I need to do is down deep in my soul, understand what it means to fear God. Fear God. Didn't God say the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge? When I really understand what it means to fear God, then it's going to change my outlook on what I do with the treasure from Him that He has given me. And so by fearing God, I am possessing my soul. How about deepening your faith? Don't be like those who draw back to perdition, the Hebrew writer says in chapter 10 and verse 39, but rather to possess your souls for being saved, for salvation. 1 Peter 1 in verse 9, Peter was writing to people who were being persecuted, and he said, you are being persecuted, but you are receiving the salvation of your souls by your faith. The more we grow our faith, we are possessing our souls and laying up treasures in heaven. James said, chapter 1, verse 21, receive the implanted word which is able to save your soul. It seems to me that he is saying take the Word of God and put it fully in your heart and in your mind. I had 4 kids. Andrea come up to me this morning and said, I got verses for you. 4. That's outstanding. And continuing to teach the tree that's out there in the lobby, the whole thing that they're doing in training children to learn verses is putting the Word of God implanted in their hearts, and it's a way to possess your soul and lay up treasures in heaven. How about becoming comfortable with the yoke of Jesus? Jesus said, all you who are weak and heavy laden, come to me. Why? My yoke is easy, my burden is light, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus saying that when we become comfortable with His yoke, we are possessing our souls and laying up treasure in heaven. Peter said, 1 Peter 4:19, we possess our souls and we lay up treasures in heaven when he, again, writing to those people experiencing great persecution, he said, when you are persecuted, you respond by doing good to them. The more I can reach out and be good when someone is bad to me, the more I am possessing my soul with patience and laying up treasures in heaven. Hebrews 13:17. Obey those who shepherd over you as those who watch for your soul. The more I learn to be submissive to God's leaders, understanding that God gave them that authority, then I am possessing my soul and laying up treasures in heaven. But now notice this also, guys. That verse also says, you possess your soul. You lay up treasure in heaven when you're watching for the souls of these people. That's a tough situation. So those who take on the responsibility of shepherding God's flock, they are possessing their souls and laying up treasures by watching over the souls of these people. Not by spending inordinate amount of time in other menial concepts. You want to possess your soul? You want to lay up treasures? That's exactly what Jesus said we have to do. And finally, Peter said, 1 Peter 2 and verse 11, watch out for those things that war against your soul, the lusts and the affections of the world. To possess your soul and to lay up treasures in heaven, you got to fight the things that are trying to destroy your soul. Now, you might be able to find a whole lot more passages, I don't know. But here are 7 good ways, I think, to lay up treasures in heaven. is a place where we store it. It is secure. And we don't mind showing everybody about it. If that's something we treasure, what God has given us, don't we want others to have it too? So our job in laying up treasure in heaven is to create or to live a life here that will fashion us spiritually to appreciate and enjoy heaven even more. So the question is this: how much do I want to enjoy heaven? How much? Well, it's on me. The more I do, the deeper I dive, the more I understand, the more I practice, is how much more I will enjoy my experience in heaven. And how do you do it? Right here. Prepare the soul here for living there. How you do that? You lay up the treasure. You take care of the soul and get it ready for eternity. I hope that helps. I often say, and it's the perfect time to say it again, most of my preaching begins right here. And whatever you get out of it, great. But it starts right here. And I want to do that. I want to work on that. I want to appreciate that. I want you to as well. Well, if you have a treasure and you're not taking care of it, why don't you start? If you've not accepted the treasure that God offers, tonight would be a good time. We don't want to leave here. If someone needs and wants to be immersed into Jesus, or if someone needs us to help through prayer and care to get you preparing your soul for the future. Let's stand and sing together.
We hope you enjoyed today's broadcast, brought to you by the Richmond Church of Christ. We are located at 1500 Lancaster Road in Richmond, Kentucky. We meet on Sunday mornings for Bible class at 9 a.m., followed by our morning worship service held at 10 a.m. Our Sunday evening service is held at 6 p.m., and our midweek Bible study is held on Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you are in the area, we would love to have you as our honored guest. Thanks for listening.